Welcome and thank you for joining us once again. My name is Gloria Coelho. I'm the director of the Caritas Consciousness Project, formerly the Caritas Center. As our new name implies, our purpose is to promote the evolution of consciousness, individually and collectively. Caritas is a forum for consciousness studies involving healing, paranormal faculties, spiritual exploration, and the convergence of science and spirituality. This evening, we're delighted once again to have physicist Claude Swanson online with us for part 3 in his 14-part series, lecture series on his new book called Science of the Soul, the Afterlife, and the Shift. Dr. Swanson was educated as a physicist at MIT and Princeton for more than 25 years, interspersed with his conventional professional career in applied physics. Dr. Swanson has pursued investigations into unconventional physics. His principal interest has been unified field theory, the so-called theory of everything, which could explain the universe at the deepest possible level. This has led him to investigate many aspects of the paranormal, which appear to be completely real phenomena that violate our present science. Paranormal phenomena, which have now been proven in the laboratory in many cases, offer a window into the deeper universe, the mysteries of consciousness, and unlock new forces and principles which conventional science has only begun to glimpse. So now let me present Dr. Claude Swanson.
Well, it's wonderful to talk to whoever is out there. This is chapter 2 of my book. Lecture 3 is really about the near-death experience. And it was really one of the ways that this whole subject came to the attention of scientists in recent years. People began noticing in hospitals that the people who had been clinically dead or very near death were coming back to life or coming back to consciousness and reporting amazing things. They were describing being out of body, traveling to the other side, seeing angels, relatives, spirit guide, and things like that. And when certain researchers began looking at these cases, they found that there was a similarity in the patterns, that no matter what country the people came from or what religion they happened to have, they were reporting very similar structures to their experiences. This is just my background here, which Gloria went over briefly. And this is some basic material that you probably already know from previous lectures, that as a physicist, I've been trying to understand this whole subject of consciousness and of the paranormal phenomena and the higher phenomena of science that they aren't presently taught in our standard physics courses. And yet we're seeing lots of evidence for these things. In my first book, Remote Viewing was one of the subjects I talked about. In my second book, I talk about the energy that makes these things possible. In the present book, Science of the Soul, the Afterlife, and the Shift, we have a huge database of information about extraordinary experiences after the physical body dies. There's lots of evidence that our consciousness continues, and we'll go over some of that today. That's what the book is all about, of course. And this gives us an important clue to the real nature of consciousness. It tells us that the universe is not the way our physics of today that describes matter. It's not that simple. That's not how things work at an ultimate level. There are other dimensions, other vibrations that exist at the same time. And we visit many of those planes when we go into the afterlife. So George Meek, who was a researcher after he was a successful businessman, and at age 60, he quit his business and spent the rest of his life and his money researching the afterlife. And he said, in the last 25 years, mankind has learned more about what happens when we die than was learned in all periods, in all earlier periods of recorded history. So all the new technologies have enabled us to have a much deeper understanding of what goes on after the physical body dies. And what you find out is that this life that we go through here on the earth is a very small part of who we are and of our total experience here in the universe, which goes on and on and on. We have many ways of learning about these dimensions and the nature of the soul after death and what goes on in these other realms. Near-death experiences is the one today we're discussing, but out-of-body experiences, electronic voice phenomena, mediumship, that is certain people who can communicate telepathically with the dead, or other ways of having medium communication, hypnotic past life regressions. Often children, when they're very little, will remember memories of a past life and talk about it. When they first begin to talk, until age 3, 4, or 5, they often are able to describe their memories of previous lives. Automatic writing means that a spirit can take over the hand and the pen of a medium and write messages. We have lots of examples of that. There are certain masters and adepts who can communicate very easily, go into these other dimensions and tell us about what the afterlife is like. Dreams, sometimes spirit possession is a way that we make contact with these spirits. Ghosts and hauntings and poltergeists, these are all things, and sacred texts are all different ways we know about the afterlife. And my book covers all of these different techniques. But today we'll just focus on the first of those in the list, the near-death experience. Swami Kriyananda, who was Yogananda's student, says that science has shown us the universe in a way that makes it possible for us to realize that God cannot be an old man with a long white beard, and his son cannot be just one human being on this mud ball of a planet, that the infinite truths have to be far greater than we can imagine. The whole purpose of life is to understand that we have come back from God and that we must go back to him. And I think it's this viewpoint and the science that's coming out of the afterlife studies that help us understand that many of our worldly religions, although they're very noble and they teach us good lessons, they may only give us a small glimpse of the totality of the nature of the soul, that the soul lives forever. It goes through very complex and experiences, and in the higher levels, there are things going on that we can barely glimpse in our normal physical life here on earth. So studying the afterlife gives us a window into these amazing higher dimensions. The near-death experience refers to people who have died or been very close to death or clinically dead, who then come back and they have memories of what happened while they were, quote, dead. They often describe beings of light, beautiful cities, and other amazing experiences, encountering relatives and things like that. The amazing thing about these accounts is that there's a consistency. If you look over many, many people reporting experiences of this type, you find similarities. It's been known since ancient times. Plato talks about a soldier named Er who died in battle. He was being prepared for cremation on the pyre, the funeral pyre that was tradition in that time. You put the coins on his eyes and light the fire and burn the body. And just before they lit the torch, he came back to life. And he explained that for several days he had been wandering in another reality, another physical, another dimension, which was the afterlife. And he described the events in great detail. In Asia, the Tibetans talk about similar things. The Book of the Dead describes many of these travels that the soul undergoes after the physical body is dead. In the Middle Ages, it was also known in certain circles that this afterlife was very real. Here is a painting by Hieronymus Bosch around 1510 describing what they were describing when you die. And here is a tunnel that leads to another place in the distance where there's light. There are angels in the tunnel. There are loved ones and relatives who meet you on this trip. So this is very similar to what people today describe as what often happens in a near-death experience. When they die, they see a tunnel like this, and it leads them to the other side, to the next dimension in the afterlife. Not everyone has the same experience, but a lot of them do. The first modern near-death experience that kind of got people's attention was a man named George Ritchie, 1944, who was a young soldier in basic training. He wanted to be a doctor, but he was in basic training, and the camp was hit by the flu, by a very serious flu, and he had 107 temperature or something really high like that, and was pronounced dead. At the hospital, they covered his head with a sheet and declared him dead, and they prepared his body to be shipped back to Virginia or someplace for burial. But meanwhile, he went out of body. What he remembers is floating above his body, seeing this lump under the sheet, and then beginning to explore. He didn't realize he was dead. There was no knowledge of the out-of-body state in those days. And so he was worried about getting back to Virginia. It was almost Christmas time, and he wanted to see his family. And so he begins floating out of the hospital, and he realizes he can float into the air. So he rises up and looks around for the train station to find the tracks. The train will lead him back to Virginia. But in the process, he finds out that nobody can see him. He tries to ask people for directions, and they can't see him. And that's a concern. Trying to see his family if they can't see him is not going to be very helpful. So he goes back to the hospital and finds the bed where his body was buried, and where his body was covered by the sheet, and tries to figure how he can get back into his body, because he wants to take his body with him. And as he is standing there, a light begins to grow in the room. And then he realizes there's a man in the middle of the light. And the man says to his mind, "You are in the presence of the Son of God." And the man projected enormous power. He knew the man loved him. And at that point, he received a very detailed past life review. He said it was panoramic. He could watch himself standing at the blackboard in the third grade spelling class, the time he received his Eagle Scout badge. He saw himself as a premature infant struggling for breath in the incubator. So time didn't seem to pass, but he was able to very, very quickly go over many, many experiences in his entire life. And then the being asked him what he had done with his life, if he had loved others as God loved him. And he realized he hadn't done very much and had been very self-centered. The light being took him on a tour of the afterlife. He saw places that looked like Earth with people going about daily activities. He deduced that the ones with a glow around them were still alive, but there were other beings without the glow who were also there. They could not be seen or heard by the living beings, and they could not move physical objects, but they were all around. So here he was being given a tour of the afterlife, and the first level he was shown looks just like the Earth. And there were many people there who looked just like we do in normal everyday life. But and they had glows around them, which indicated they were alive. But as well, there were other beings who looked like people, but did not have the glow. They were spirits who had passed away, but still were hanging around in this Earth-like environment. He calls them earthbound. They were trapped there by their own addictions, their obsessions, their unfinished business. He began realizing that maybe hell wasn't the fiery furnace he was taught in Sunday school. It seemed as though one level of hell may exist right here on earth. So on earth, some spirits occupy the same space as the living, this earth plane here. Hence, we do have hauntings, we have ghosts, we have spirit phenomena, we have people who talk to their loved ones sometimes, and they can come and visit this plane and make contact with us and be here. But he was wondering why they didn't move on. This has to do with the vibration of the beings who were stuck in that level. He was taken also to other levels. He saw a lower region that was very dark. It was filled with ghostly figures. They were angry. They were frustrated. They were often in combat with each other, fighting, trying to hurt each other. But because they were not physical, they couldn't actually hurt each other. But it was very unpleasant to be there. Then he was led to higher realms, higher dimensions that were full of beauty and love and landscapes with tranquility and peace. And so he began getting his first glimpse of all these different levels in the afterlife. Um, and at the end of this tour, where this being of light is guiding him, he was given a distant glimpse of an even higher realm, a glowing, seemingly endless city uh, that he was not allowed to go to. But he was assured that there are higher levels in heaven that we can aspire to as we grow. And so when we read accounts of many people who have experienced near-death experiences, um, we find that what they report is very similar to what other types of reports and experiences come from mediums, from past life regressions, from between life regressions, from direct voice, seances, from automatic writing, and the other chapters in my book where I talk about each type of evidence we have for different views into the afterlife. And each one gives us a little bit different glimpse of what things are like, but the picture is the same. This hierarchy of vibrations comes through over and over again. George Ritchie concluded, God is busy building a race of men who know how to love. I believe that the fate of the earth itself depends on the progress we make, and that the time now is very short. So he's really being given a glimpse of the afterlife, of these higher dimensions, and that our physical life here is a small slice of who we really are. But the two pioneers of modern near-death studies read these accounts and learned about these cases and went from there. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Raymond Moody were both doctors, and they describe how the structure that was described by Ritchie is very similar to what their patients described. Kubler-Ross was a medical doctor and would sit on a bed beside her patients, would hold their hands and talk to them for hours. She found that not a single human being did not yearn for love and touch and communication. No matter how far gone, how much in distress they were, they welcomed the contact with another person, the chance to talk about what they were feeling and thinking. They didn't want they didn't want the distance that hospitals have between the doctors and the patients. Kubler-Ross noticed that most doctors try to avoid the dying patients. They seem uncomfortable with the whole process. But the patients themselves craved honesty and contact. So she would ask the patients what they were going through. In the last stage of illness, they were often treated the worst in the hospital. She would go to those people because she felt she could learn the most from them. She began to realize that her patients knew what was going to happen next. They knew they would soon be out of this hellish earth environment and with loved ones again, not separated from departed family members. She encountered her first near-death experiencer. That was Mrs. Schwartz, who was in critical condition, suddenly finding herself floating out of body and looking down from the ceiling. Schwartz could hear what the doctors and nurses were saying. She felt no pain, but a great deal of curiosity. She floated down and poked one of the residents, but to her shock, her hand went right through him. So she later remembered even the jokes that the doctors told while she was on her deathbed. But not a single doctor believed her when she told the story when she came back to life. So in 1970, almost a year after she died for the final time, Dr. Kubler-Ross was getting discouraged because she'd been doing this research and giving lectures and talking about the needs of people who were dying, but there was lack of support in the hospital. She'd been giving lectures but was preparing to quit. She was getting discouraged about it and was getting ready to quit teaching and doing the research. Then one day she entered the elevator and she was shocked to see a semi-transparent figure of a woman floating in front of her as if they knew each other. She was smiling at Kubler-Ross. Others there at the elevator couldn't see her. Kubler-Ross had never seen a ghost before, and as a psychiatrist, she had dealt with many patients who were hallucinating or delusional, and she assumed it was a form of insanity, of course. But she had never had it happen to her, and this ghost seemed to know her and began to talk back to her. It was Mrs. Schwartz. Mrs. Schwartz had been dead for 10 months, and at that point, the spirit told Kubler-Ross that she must not quit her job, that the lectures she was giving on death and dying were extremely important. This was shocking to Kubler-Ross because she told no one that she was considering quitting. Mrs. Schwartz told her emphatically that her work had just begun. Kubler-Ross asked the spirit for proof that she'd not imagined this. She gave the ghost a pen and paper and asked her to write a brief note for her colleagues. Afterwards, she examined the note and analyzed the handwriting. It was Mrs. Schwartz. She still has the note, and she did not quit her work. So one theme encountered over and over is that these NDE experiencers, or NDEers, had not wanted to come back to life. Over there on the other side, they were met by guides and felt an overwhelming love and comfort and peace they'd not experienced here on the earth. They didn't want to return here. In many cases, they had to be persuaded. often told that it was not time yet for them to die. They still had work to do here. So they returned to life reluctantly. Through her research, Dr. Kubler-Ross reached the scientific conclusion that death does not really exist in its traditional definition. The second modern pioneer of NDE research is Dr. Raymond Moody. He was an undergraduate at the University of Virginia in 1965, and he learned about the story of George Ritchie. In fact, I think he met him, and he told him about this journey he had into the afterlife in 1944. That spurred Moody to begin collecting cases of similar events, leading to his landmark book, Life After Life, in 1975. He called them near-death experiences and found that they occur frequently. One of the first subjects that Moody interviewed was a man who walked into his lecture when he was talking about this on a college campus. And this man was in bad shape. He had welding goggles over his eyes to protect his eyes from the bright lights of normal daylight. Both of his legs were not working very well. He was propped up by crutches under both of his arms, and he clumped his way like a crab down the aisle to a seat and listened to Moody's lecture. After the lecture, he got Moody's attention and began telling him about his story. And that was Daniel Brinkley, who had been struck by lightning and declared dead, and for 28 minutes was clinically dead, covered by a sheet in the hospital and awaiting being sent to the morgue. His near-death experience was one of the most complete that Moody encountered in his early research. Moody said afterwards that all near-death experiencers claimed they no longer have a fear of death. But in talking to Daniel Brinkley, it was the first time he'd actually seen that lack of fear demonstrated. "How come you're not afraid?" he asked Brinkley, who was about to undergo a dangerous heart operation. This is for a later operation. The answer came easily. Because living on Earth is like being forced to go to summer camp. You hate everyone and you miss your mama. Raymond, I'm going home. That's Daniel Brinkley. I've met him on several occasions. He's a wonderful Southern boy from Aiken, South Carolina. Great raconteur, very colorful in the stories, the way he recounts them. After his first near-death experience, he would go to the churches, the little Protestant churches in Aiken and other areas around South Carolina, and listen to the preachers. And he would tell them his experiences with what heaven is really like. And he would have them make them compare his experiences with what they'd been taught, and would have debates with them about the afterlife. So he's died 3 times. The first time was the lightning strike, which went through the phone into his body while he was talking to a friend on the phone. And in that particular case, it was so strong, it nailed it welded the nails in his boots to the nails in the floor and threw his body about 10 feet onto a bed. When the EMTs arrived, he was floating around the room and could watch everything. And he didn't know what to do. So when they put his body in the ambulance, he decided he better follow it. So he floated along behind the ambulance and would watch as the rescue workers tried to revive his body. One comment he made was, "I thought I looked better than that." looking at his dead body there on the bed. But the interesting thing was that in this state now, he could see the auras of the workers who were trying to revive him. He could tell that they glowed with beautiful colors around their body, that they loved what they were doing. And he was watching them try to bring him back to life as he floated along inside the ambulance or outside of it, watching this whole thing. And as he did, a cloud appeared above his head, and a dark tunnel opens up in the cloud. And he looks at that and says, "That looks interesting." So he goes up into this tunnel. There's a light at the end of it, and he begins following the light. And he emerges in this place of light, um, and meets a being of light who he described as having a face like a bag full of diamonds, no recognizable features. And he was given his first life review. And his life review was kind of a difficult experience for him because Daniel had been a bully as a young boy, and as a teenager and young adult, he'd been a hitman for the CIA and other organizations, and he actually had killed people. So suddenly he experienced what it felt like on the other end of his actions. He saw the grief of the family and things like that. So it shook him up and totally changed him. Another thing he experienced in this uh, light realm of light was he saw these beings around him that had different colors, and they seemed to be projecting information to him. And they showed him almost like little film clips, like little video images of scenes. He didn't know what they were, but they were images of something happening. One was of tanks rolling across a desert. One was of a huge building exploding. Many different experiences, 117 different boxes of knowledge, he called them. Because Raymond Moody was working with him, Raymond wrote down the details of what Daniel could remember. And in those days, Daniel spent a lot of his time back and forth as he was recovering from his first near-death experience. He was out of body quite a bit. He was communicating with the other side quite a bit. So he had very clear and vivid memory of what he had seen. In later years, they found that of these boxes of knowledge, about 95% of them were prophecies that had come true by that point. So they were all previews of events that were going to happen at some point in the future. He also, while in the afterlife, in his first experience, saw beautiful crystal cities. And some of these boxes of knowledge, he was told, pertain to our future and the choices we make as a world, and given some warnings about how we need to behave to make sure that we have a positive future and not a negative one. So it was things like this, cases like this, that Moody began hearing from his subjects. And he collected a lot of data. And then one day, he says, I read a long article in a medical journal that tried to explain away near-death experiences as being various tricks of the brain. By then, I had studied NDEs extensively, and none of the explanations that this researcher listed made sense. It was finally clear to me that he had missed the most obvious explanation. NDEs are real. He had missed the possibility that the soul really does travel. And here are a couple other quotes from Michael Talbot and DeEer's Universal report, that they are never judged by the beings of light, but feel only love and acceptance in their presence. So it's somewhat different from what many of our religions might teach us. It's not the fear-based religion, the experiences, although we do experience the pain that we cause other people, and that may determine which level we end up in the afterlife. If our vibration is low, we've caused a lot of hurt, a lot of harm, very materialistic, we may end up in a low vibration. But it's something that we are doing to ourselves. We're choosing it for ourselves. And as we raise our vibration, we can shift to a higher plane in the afterlife. So it's not the punitive picture that some religions might cause us to believe. So Talbot says the only judgment that ever takes place is self-judgment and arises solely out of the NDEer's own feelings of guilt and repentance. What I loved was Steve Jobs' comment when he was dying. He was on his deathbed. He was not a particularly religious person, but as he's lying there, his last words were, "Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow." And that sentiment is often reflected by people on their deathbed as they begin getting a glimpse of the other side. They begin making contact with the higher planes and where they're about to go. Another NDEer, Harry Hone, said, "People will say you are dead, but that's not true. You are the life, and you have left. You are not dead. It's your body that's dead." And Daniel Brinkley, at a lecture, I watched him stare at the audience, and he would say this. He said, "You're as dead right now as you're ever going to be." Another example of an NDE, a very different kind of person, was a young 3-year-old boy at the time. He was 4 within the next year, of course, and wrote about this. His father wrote about this. But his name was Colton Burpo, and he had a near-death experience in the hospital in a critical condition, burst appendix. And he talked about visiting heaven while he was in this state. And there were angels in the sky who he saw, who talked to him, and they sang to him. It kind of made him happy. I mean, he had a very joyous experience. He described going into the afterlife and meeting a young girl, a couple of years older than he was, who told him that she was his sister. She said that she died in childbirth, and his parents never gave her a name. They'd kept her a secret from him. He'd never been told about her. But when he came back from the hospital, they admitted, yes, it was true. So this is part of a film made about Colton Burpo's experience. It's called Heaven is for Real. It's a really sweet movie that captures the whole process from one person's experience. He'd also met his deceased grandfather on the other side while he had his experience. But his grandfather did not look the way he did in the pictures that his father had on the mantelpiece. They had his grandfather looked much younger and did not wear glasses. And at first, he didn't recognize the picture his father was showing him. His dad had to find a younger version, a younger photograph of his grandfather before Colton recognized it. He said, "Everyone is young in heaven and no one wears glasses." And that conclusion is consistent with dozens and dozens of other accounts from many other sources that in the afterlife, if we die when we're young, we mature to young middle age, to our 20s or 30s, and to the prime of life. If we die when we're very old, we regress. We get younger and younger in the afterlife. So typically, people in the afterlife, when you see them, they are described as looking in their 20s or early 30s if they've been there for a while. Now, they have the option, apparently, of appearing an age that you will recognize. So, to some extent, the way you appear in the afterlife has to do with consciousness. But that template of our appearance appears to go as part of the soul, something we carry with us, so we can present ourselves in this form so others can recognize us. So one of the first things that happens when you die is an out-of-body experience. People describe near-death experiences first floating above their body, looking back at it. Here's a photograph of a man dying, and when the picture was taken, there were three cloudy-looking bulbs or balls hovering above his body. These are orbs. I've talked to nurses who were with patients at the time of death, and they see a golden orb leaving the body at the moment of death. It sort of correlates with the data about the loss of weight, 21 ounces that 21 grams that we suddenly become lighter at the moment of death. Something leaves the body. It's an energy form that is captured on film sometimes, and also changes our weight. So that this is part of the astral body. This is part of our body in the next dimension, the afterlife dimension, where most of us go from the earth. It's the next higher dimension. And it's been studied in the laboratory when you go out of body, as remote viewers often are able to do, to go visit some distant location, to go look at some target or some spot. They go out of body, and so that out of body form, this astral energy, has been observed, has been measured in controlled conditions. And next lecture, I'll talk about some of those experiments. But we have some very real confirmation that these astral forms and spheres that contain our soul are real. So there's several basic phases we go through from all of these studies. We float out of the physical body. That's the OBE, or out-of-body experience. The second phase, we can go anywhere almost instantly. That's the amazing thing about the out-of-body, is that you can go not just necessarily to physical places on the earth, but some people use them even to go into the afterlife or other planes of consciousness to visit people and communicate. The third phase is this tunnel or a transitional gate where we pass into a higher realm, and we may see a religious figure there, a Christ-like figure, a Buddha or a God that may give us guidance. The fourth level is we may identify God or some higher spirit or higher consciousness that communicates with us. And at this level, our shape is not very important anymore. And then the life review, that's the most frequently reported standard event that often causes us to come back if we choose or allowed to come back to life and not have that be the permanent end of that lifetime. When we come back, then these life reviews can be very, very, have a strong influence on our personality, on our change, how we see ourselves, how we act in the world. I mean, Daniel Brinkley, for example, like I said, had been a bully and a hitman. He'd been pretty rough on his friends and associates. And a lot of people were pretty angry at him. He had a lot of karma there that was stacked up and waiting to be dumped on him. Well, after his near-death experience the first time, he came back and he was totally changed. He had realized that all men are brothers, that we are all connected, that love is this powerful force, that all the physical stuff is not so important. And he came back and he apologized. He tried to say he was sorry to all those people who had hurt him. Unfortunately, they hadn't changed. They were still gunning for him. They were still holding a grudge. Many of them beat him up or got even with him now in his repentant state. So he had to go through some trials when he came back, but he was definitely changed as a result of the NDE. So Raymond Moody summarizes, what has amazed me since the beginning of my interest are the great similarities in the reports, despite the fact that they come from people of highly varied religious, social, and educational backgrounds. So the great message for us Westerners is the physical world is not all there is. It's only a playground on which we can meet and learn and grow. We come here to have experiences, to work out karma, to learn lessons. As the Hindus would say, this so-called real world is illusion. It is Maya. In the higher dimensions on which the soul and consciousness exist, those are the more lasting and real places. And we're building up our lessons and our knowledge and our wisdom for use in those higher dimensions. So the different levels and conditions in the afterlife, as described by their death experiences, is very similar to the levels and zones found by many researchers who have accessed the afterlife using other dimensions. And in my book, I have various chapters, and in some of them, we have people communicating from the afterlife to mediums, for example, or through direct voice, or through telepathic mediums, or automatic writing, or other forms of communication. And they describe their life in whatever zone they happen to be living in. And oftentimes they have visited some of the other planes, the higher planes and the lower planes. And so their descriptions correspond very closely to the ones that I just went over here. So overall, we can summarize this cartoon from George Meek, who describes this whole system as like a department store. At the bottom floor, here we are on the earth, and we come in to the basement or the first level, and there's an elevator there, and we can go up, or we can even go down, but mostly up to the higher planes, and occasionally then we come back down and reincarnate for another lifetime and recycle and try to work on the things that need to be worked on. Eventually, we have mastered the difficulties we had with our emotional body, and we can shed that. That's the astral level. We can shed that and then go even to the higher planes, which are the much more blissful planes that are called also the true heaven, and the causal and mental planes and the celestial planes above that. So that's kind of a little cartoon version of the overall picture here. So Raymond Moody, in studying many, many cases, found the basic pattern. And we went over this before. I'm not sure I need to do this again, but he said anyway, there's a great peacefulness at the time of death. You may feel and hear a noise or move into a tunnel. Spirits often appear to help. Relatives and loved ones who are dead may show up to help you cross over. A being of light who will guide you. As you approach the border with the afterlife, there may be a choice whether you go back, in some cases, or for most of us, probably continue on into the astral plane. There's a problem sometimes because some people are very earthbound. They're very um, addicted to the physical world. They may not believe there's anything else, or they may just be obsessed with some project or task or individual, or maybe a house or something else they really love, a car that they really love. They don't want to leave, and they want to hang on even after they die. And some of those people will do something. There's a layer around the physical body called the etheric layer that enables us to interface with physical reality. They may try to hold that layer to us and not enter the astral plane. And that'll prevent them from seeing this higher heaven world, which is where they should go next. And if they resist that and hold on, it's almost like a security blanket. They hold on to it, it'll it'll mean they can't really see very much. They kind of, it's like being in a fog, and they could be stuck for hundreds of years in some cases, um, afraid to let go of that etheric layer, and yet not seeing any bright angels or any of the afterlife realm that is waiting for them. And soul rescue is one process that's often used when someone will go out of body or from a higher plane come down, tap them on the shoulder, get their attention, and get them to let go of that etheric security blanket and look and notice that the afterlife, the astral plane, and higher planes are waiting for them. So that happens sometimes. Then other cultures also tell us about near-death experiences. Um, in different religions, they may describe the experience slightly different. Here's a Mormon near-death experience, and here they say, my spirit left the body, and I could see it lying under the derrick. And at that moment, my guardian angel, my mother, and my sister Anne were beside me. My mother died on January 31st, 1918, and my sister at the age of 4 years. I saw that her spirit was full grown in stature and seemed very intelligent. So here you have an example of someone who died at age 4, and yet he perceives her as being fully grown, because this is what happens in the afterlife. We do progress to our ideal state, ideal age. Here's another person who, a Mormon NDE, who describes how he perceives things. And again, you can see the flavor of the Mormon religion coming into his description. He says, when in the spirit world I saw the order of righteous men and women, beheld them organized in their several grades. The grade is a Mormon term. And there appeared to be no obstruction to my vision. I could see every man and woman in their grade and order. I looked to see whether there was any disorder there, but there was none. Neither could I see any death, nor any darkness, disorder, or confusion. He saw the righteous gathered together in the spirit world, and there were no wicked spirits among them. So he perceived the afterlife, and it was well ordered, and pretty much just the way his Mormon church taught him that it should be, which is interesting. And we see this over and over again, that our culture will color our perceptions in the early phases of the afterlife. Here's another Mormon who describes the beautiful buildings. For Mormons, the churches are temples that are very, very important in how they look. And he says, in regard to gardens, I've seen good gardens on this earth, but I never saw any to compare with those that were there. I saw flowers of numerous kinds, and some with from 50 to 100 different colored flowers growing upon one stalk. And he goes on, but this description of bushes and flowers with amazing qualities is something else that's often described in the afterlife, that people um, encounter flowers there that we would call magical. They have characteristics that we don't encounter here on Earth. Um, this whole idea that the afterlife can have differences based upon religions or our belief system is something that comes up over and over again. It only pertains to a certain level in the afterlife called the belief system territories. And that's where this last Mormon description comes from. There's a region where if you're a devout believer in a certain religion, then the odds are very high that you will end up in a region just like that, just the way you were expecting it to be in your afterlife. But after you're there a while, you begin to learn that that's only a small fraction of what's really there. And to really develop and evolve further, you need to let go of those narrow belief systems. And here's one Reverend A.D. Matson, who's a Protestant minister, who described that whole experience. He said, I did notice that there's a tendency among certain sects of religious people over here to congregate in their little groups and have their little sessions of what they feel are heaven. However, I am told by my teacher here that eventually they become very bored with this narrowness. And then their own helpers and teachers here try to give them another thought and another idea and help them to break away from this narrow approach. So the narrow sects and religions are only a part of what's there. And that's really how it can be that the higher truth in the afterlife is something beyond the narrow beliefs of any particular religion that's made here on earth. Here's a Buddhist perspective on this whole question of the afterlife. At the point of death, an individual will pass through bardo states, which offer a chance of enlightenment. In the luminous bardo of Dharmata, various religious deities are said to appear. Some of these are believed to take the form of non-Buddhist figures. So a dying Christian would see visions of Christ or the Virgin Mary. Those who pass into the bardo states but then return to life are referred to as tilak, which means return from death. Although they appear to die due to illness, they instead spend time touring the realm of the dead to witness judgment and suffering in the hell realms. That's really the lowest, most difficult levels of the afterlife. Occasionally, they take a side trip to paradise. Then they're sent back by the Lord of Death with a stern warning about living spiritually beneficial lives. So the Buddhist admonition for getting through all this is be free of attachment and aversion. Keep your mind pure and unite your mind with Buddha. And the Western translation of that is go to the light. So when we do that, when we see that light at the end of the tunnel, and we focus on that and not allow ourselves to be distracted by any little spirits or other things we might see along the way, then we're being pulled toward the highest vibration and we'll get to the astral dimension that where we need to be, but we'll be much happier once we get there. That's where the real bliss is. There is a dark side for some people in near-death experiences. And PMH Atwater has written about this quite a bit because we don't want to just delude ourselves about what it's all about. I mean, there are 7 levels and sub-levels within that, and they have to do with how we have behaved, in our life and how our soul, whatever level we happen to be, and what's best for us to learn from. So here's an example. A man who was despondent about the death of his wife shot himself, died as a result, and was resuscitated. He states, I didn't go where my wife was. I went to an awful place. I immediately saw the mistake I'd made. I thought, I wish I hadn't done it. And if you think of Robin Williams' wonderful movie, What Dreams May Come, they also portray these dark and hellish realms there. And about 1 in 7 NDEs apparently report some kind of negative experience like this. And it may be a coincidence that 1 out of 7 of these afterlife planes is the bottom one, which is sort of the hellish, least pleasant realm. So, but the important thing to remember, even there, we have examples of people who did go there. Um, in the book Naso Lar, written by Chico Xavier, it was automatic writing from a spirit when he died, had ended up in a realm like that. And he was quite surprised. He didn't believe in hell or heaven or any of the afterlife, first of all. But secondly, he'd been a doctor, a medical doctor. So he thought he'd been doing good for people. So suddenly he was in this dark, hellish place where everybody was angry, violent. And after despair and suffering, for wandering for some time, he began praying. He was not religious, but he began praying. And his mother, he didn't know, was elsewhere, of course, and she was also praying for him. And the combined power of the prayer led him to be brought into a better plane, a higher plane. That was Nasamar, which was a sort of a facility of healing. And what he learned from the whole experience is what comes through in the afterlife, that we're not stuck in any particular plane. The vibration, as we build up our vibration and we focus on higher ideas and higher thoughts and more love, we can move up ourselves to higher planes. Um, so here's advice from another expert who goes out of body quite frequently, a psychic researcher. And if the mind of the dying person has not been properly concentrated upon the clear light, he's liable to see scores of devils and demons of all sorts. But it is emphasized over and over again in the book that these demons have no actual objective existence. They are merely hallucinations or thought forms, having no actuality save in the mind of the seer. They're all purely symbolical. This is also supported by Michael Tamura, a very brilliant medium and teacher who has had 3 near-death experiences in this lifetime and remembers dozens and dozens of past lives. And he says that this happened to him while he was dead. And he went into a meditation called Body of Glass, I think, where all these scary things that are coming at you, you let them pass by you or through you. You don't put any energy into them or any focus into them. You let them go by. And that meditation, he says, we learn about it here in the physical because we may need it in the afterlife. Another person who has studied a lot about the nature of the afterlife and the spirit world is Michael Abrams, who discovered that he could talk to spirits and in fact um, became a medical doctor and worked in the emergency room where he was able to communicate with the spirit of the dying person. And his conversations often made a real difference in their whole process of death. He says, we've been together in many ways, in many roles with each other. This is the nature of our spirit guides and us, that we tend to swap roles. We both will take time as a spirit guide in some lifetimes. He said, in fact, you were once my angel, and in due course, you will be my angel again. We have known each other for a long, long time, and I will be with you for the rest of your life. That's what he was told by his angel. I will never leave you. Another thing that he was told is that there was only one jewel. He's talking here about the soul, but it's really the universal soul, that our souls are all part of a great soul, which is the soul of the entire universe. It's a consciousness that fills all space and time, and it connects us all together. So this one jewel, one light, one mind. When you're dealing with an angel, you're dealing with God. This is what he was told. God is the great organizing principle in the universe, the force that creates order. It is this order that makes life, love, knowledge, and beauty possible when they would otherwise be impossible. So it makes possible order and structure and things to grow and to create and get better. It makes happiness and bliss. So no sequence of random events in a purely random universe could ever explain the origin of life and the evolution of God. Conscious beings that have occurred on Earth appealing that theory maybe just, I think I messed that up. But anyway, the point is clear. And this picture from chapter 1 of my book is my physics attempt at depicting the same idea, that if you look at every little particle in the universe, they're all interacting with the little photons and phitons, little packets of energy and packets of information that connect them with each other. And some concentrations of energy form these little knots where there's more information knotted together. And that's what the soul is. It's a place that's like a meeting, a central station where things come together, and but they connect to all the other processes and intelligences throughout the universe. And to me, that's saying the same thing that he's saying, that this one jewel is this conscious universe, and all of us are part of it. And then Michael Tamura, again, one of my favorite people, he says, from the soul's perspective, what's dying? Every single one of you has died many times. You should all have PhDs in deathology. You're all dying experts. You don't need me to tell you about dying. You've been there before, done that. So what's the problem? Oh, you forgot. Again. So wonderful sense of humor, and he's also very profound. The real choice is how, as a soul, you're going to be when you get out of here, this world. Dying's easy. One thing I was aware of as a child is that the dead person was the only one laughing in the whole funeral. Everybody else is crying or angry or depressed or something. But the dead person is up here saying, hey, I'm out of here. And here's an account from an NDE researcher, the great Kenneth Ring, one of the real pioneers in this whole field, who is describing somebody, their account. of what it was like. And I could see a small pinpoint of light that seemed to grow larger. He's in the tunnel, clearly. The lights up ahead. I somehow knew that this was my destination. I sped along until it became a huge mass of beautiful and brilliant light. I stopped short right before reaching it, for I felt I was getting too far away from the earth to find my way back. So it's coming up to the boundary here. It was not long before it engulfed me, and I felt as if I became one with the light. I seemed to have knowledge of everything there is to know, and it accepted me as part of it. I felt all-knowing for a few minutes. Within the light, I could still feel the boundaries of my form, but at the same time felt one with it. I felt like I was an energy form that could never be destroyed. And here's another account. PMH Atwater, prolific writer and researcher in this field, has also had 3 near-death experiences. Seems like when you get 3, then you start to really get things figured out. She said, time ceased to exist. Past and future were completely non-existent. I was traveling in an intense, burning now. The being told me, this is who you really are. As the universe opened up to me, I could not tell the difference between myself and the infinite galaxies. I became all-powerful and all-knowing, yet I was still me. Then the being introduced me to another being of the most incredible beauty and love that anyone could comprehend. It was a greater being of intense light. It was God. The first being guided me to this light, and it let it enfold and swallow me up. I became one with love times a million, billion, trillion, forever and ever. We were made of the same stuff. Every being that ever had existed in all of creation was now part of the greater whole called God. I was one with all of them, and yet I was still me. All powerful, little old me. This is who you really are, thundered the light. It looked like a galaxy, except the points of light were not stars, they were beings. And here's a meditation that, or description that she also offered. She said, very rapidly I was enveloped within this most divine, living, golden white light, my home. The joy, bliss, humility, awe were beyond human capability to bear. The light was an infinite, loving, accepting being without form. It had personality. It communicated with me telepathically. That's what's amazing to me about this whole issue of the afterlife. I'm just going to make a parenthetical remark here because I try to capture that in my little diagram of God and this connected universe, that this network of all of these interconnections is conscious, it's alive, and it knows everything. It's all the knowledge is connected in there. So continuing, she says, it was pure truth. I was the light and the light was me. I had become homogeneous with the light. I was all love, wisdom, truth, peace, joy for all eternity. There was no concept of space or time. All takes place or exists in the eternal now. But then I love it because we have these profound transforming experiences, and then you give it to the scientist or you give it to the medical doctor, and they try to apply our limited, clumsy, materialistic ideas and theories to explaining it all. And it's hard. They can't really do it. And they do their best sometimes, if they're honest. And here's one of the best ones, Michael Sabom, one of the pioneers in doing the research. And when he started out, like most medical doctors, he was convinced that the near-death experience, if properly studied, could be reduced to a simple scientific explanation. 5 years and 116 interviews later, I found that I was wrong. No explanation has been found. Another medical doctor, Jeffrey Long, says more than 10 years ago, in 1998, I started the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation and its corresponding website, nderf.org. Over the course of the first 10 years, more than 1,300 people who had near-death experiences spent many hours of their precious time answering over 100 questions in NDERF's detailed questionnaire. These people are of every race, creed, and color and are from virtually every corner of the world. More than 95% of the respondents feel their NDE was definitely real, while virtually all of the remaining respondents feel it was probably real. Not one respondent has said it was definitely not real. And then here's some data to show you the types of ways they summarize some of these results. Here are the number of people who go through the various stages in the near-death experience from various sources. And so the first level is peace, then there's body separation, then they enter a region of darkness, then they see the light in the distance, then they enter the light. And so you can see what fraction of them report these various stages. So not everyone goes through all the stages in near-death experiences. If they actually died, then they probably do, but they aren't around, in that case, to come back and tell the researcher. But we have some of those as well. But so we have fewer and fewer reporting the higher levels, such as actually entering the light. But you can see that from piecing together this data, that all these different layers of the experience are being covered in the research. One other clue to the nature of the near-death experience is who you encounter. And when you're very close to death, your visions tend to be primarily of dead people or religious figures. And that is by the numbers here. So you see visions of the dead. So if they saw dead people or they saw religious figures in their hallucinations or in their meditations while near death, hovering near death, then 80% report seeing people in those categories. While if you're a healthy person, they hallucinate only a much smaller percentage of dead people, only about 30%. So it does really affect the kinds of people who are seen in visions. When you're a healthy living person, they seldom have visions of a dead person, according to the data. When an apparition or vision appears to a dying person, it most often conveys the message that it is time to cross over and join their loved ones in the afterlife. They are being welcomed and shown there's nothing to fear. And so this is the purpose of the message of those who appear in these visions, being plotted here. Sherry Sutherland, one of the prominent researchers in this field, says that the big thing is that instead of you know, I believe in God. Now they say, I know. Ken Ring says, thus following extraordinary encounters, respondents on the average don't become more religious. They become more spiritual. Carl Jung had an NDE, and afterwards he said, disappointed, I thought. Now I must return to the box system again. For it seemed to me as if behind the horizon of the cosmos, a three-dimensional world had been artificially built up. That's this physical world that we're in which each person sat by himself in a little box. And now I should have to convince myself all over again that this was important as he's being brought back to life again. Life in the whole world struck me as a prison, and it bothered me beyond measure that I should again be finding all that quite in order. So like so many people who have been on the other side and forced to come back into the physical, he's not exactly happy about it. In terms of physics, I like this quote by Wilbur, who says, we've learned that the exploration of the external world by the methods of physical science leads not to a concrete reality, but to a shadow world of symbols, beneath which those methods are unadapted for penetrating. In other words, we need to have consciousness included in our physics to ever obtain an adequate physics. And then I love this chart from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, comes from her work. And this is that when you're blind, even people who've been blind all their lives, when they have an NDE or an OBE, they can see. So for the first time in their lives, they may be able to see, and they can be tested on it, on what they saw, descriptions, etc. So about 80% of people in NDEs are able to see, even if they've been blind their entire life. And it also brings about long-term changes in their personality, and their beliefs, and their talents. These are some talents that we call psychic talents or consciousness talents plotted here. And in each case, there's a huge increase after a near-death experience. Our psychic abilities become much greater. Clairvoyance, telepathy, precognition, deja vu, the ability to spirit rescue, intuition, dream awareness, out-of-body experiences, perception of spirits, ability to heal, ability to see auras, and belief in psychic phenomena. All are markedly increased. It's the dark vertical bar, is the after, and the light gray bar is the before in each case. So you can see one more way that a near-death experience profoundly changes people. And just to summarize, Daniel Brinkley's statement that I love, you're as dead right now as you're ever going to be. So Bob Monroe was right. We're more than our physical bodies. Through prayer, meditation, and visualization, we can create the world we want. And as Victor Hugo said, all of the armies of the world are not as powerful as an idea whose time has come. Thank you very much. My website is synchronizeduniverse.com. There's more information there. The books are available by emailing me, which is all there on the website. And thank you very much. And in about a month, we'll have another lecture for chapter 4, or chapter 3, which is lecture 4. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Claude. That was a beautiful presentation, and we'll see you again next month.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Gloria.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.